Hello, everyone. We're just going to give it a few minutes. We've got some folks still signing on. We'll just give folks one more minute. We've still got some people coming into the Zoom meeting. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining. We're excited to present our webinar today, Staying Compliant, Strategies for EU MDR and Beyond. We've got two great subject matter experts who are going to be sharing tips and tricks around EU MDR compliance and more beyond that. Just a quick overview on Celegence, who we are and why we're hosting this webinar. We're a regulatory and medical writing consulting firm, and we cover pharmaceuticals, medical devices, and diagnostics. Most of our focus today will be on medical devices and specifically around EU MDR. And like many of you, when we first started in practice, we did everything manually. And as you know, as the regulations have gotten more complex, we quickly saw how inefficient that was. And as a result, we've built our own in-house technology that we both use ourselves and license to clients. And this has helped us as we're going through and talking about staying compliant. This is one of the things that's helped us stay compliant, be able to deliver high quality documents and do it very efficiently. We have three different platforms. We'll touch a little bit on Captus, which is the one that we use for medical and technical writing, specifically for EU MDR. We have two additional products that are used on the pharmaceutical side, DosBlur and DosScriber. Captus is our platform for literature search and for EU MDR document writing. And some of the benefits that we see there are a huge increase in efficiency. It's easier to maintain the accuracy and the quality when we're leveraging the technology. And we're able to write the documents much more quickly. We see up to a 30% time savings, for example, when we're writing our CERs. So that's a little bit about who we are, what we do, and a bit about how we do it. Now, let me introduce you to our fabulous experts today. Dr. Anushree has a doctorate in neuro-oncology, and she is one of our she's one of our leads on all things EU MDR, deep expertise in writing EU MDR documents, working on EU MDR strategies, and has a track record of success working with clients to get CERs and other documents approved by their notified bodies. So she's got some great information to share with you today around staying compliant with MDR.
Hi, everyone.
And our second speaker, Dr. Pshita. Dr. Pshita has a PhD in pharmaceutical sciences, and then we brought her over to the dark side, and now she's a medical device subject matter expert. She has also done extensive work with a wide variety of products, class 3, all the way down to class 1. for EU MDR and leads a team of medical writers working on a lot of our strategic projects for clients. So you've got two fabulous speakers who are going to walk you through EU MDR compliance. With that, let me just share the learning objectives for the webinar. So what we'll cover today is first, we'll talk about addressing the regulatory compliance hurdles. We know that EU MDR has become increasingly complex. We know the notified body expectations have continued to evolve over time. And Ipshita and Anushree will address some of the tips and tricks that we've learned to address those. Then we'll talk about leveraging technology. What are your options to be more efficient? Because the amount of work to stay compliant with MDR is not getting smaller. Every year, it seems like there's new levels of expectation. And where can you use technology to help you do that and be more efficient? Because I don't know about you, but I have never been on a team that had too many resources. It's usually the other way around. We're always trying to get more done with fewer people. And so the more we can leverage tech to be efficient, the easier it makes that. Then we'll cover clinical evaluation and readiness, making sure that everything is set on your clinical evaluation reports and that it's ready to go into notified body. And finally, get future ready, because EU MDR and the interpretation is constantly evolving. And so Ipshita and Anushree really stay on top of that with what's happening in the industry, and they'll share some information as you think about not only what are you doing today, but how do you make sure that the work you're doing now is also compliant in the future. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ipshita and enjoy. They've got some great information to share.
All right. Thank you, Erin. Hello, everyone. So welcome to today's webinar on staying compliant, strategies for EU MDR and beyond. So as we all know, the regulatory landscape continues to evolve for medical devices, particularly with the implementation of EU MDR. The manufacturers now need to stay well informed and these need to be proactive. So today we are going to discuss the key strategies and the compliance essentials to ensure that the medical device meets the global regulatory standards throughout its life cycle. Now, when we talk about life cycle of a device or a DLM, that means device life cycle management, what does that exactly mean? It refers to the structured process of managing a medical device from concept through retirement. This includes the design, development, manufacturing, post-marketing surveillance, and eventually decommissioning of the device from the market. Now, having said that, the early phase of the device lifecycle demands some important documentation that helps manufacturers to navigate the challenges for the device even after the launch in the market. For example, a risk management file in compliance to ISO 14971, a hazard analysis, usability engineering files, or cybersecurity risk assessment if applicable to the device. And these documents must comply with varying regulatory requirements across region and need a structured framework to manage its complexity. So this brings the term regulatory divergence in the picture, which basically refers to the variation in regulatory requirements and approval processes across different countries and regions. Now, these differences impact the development, approval, distribution of the medical device globally and not only in EU. For example, if you see the slide, some of the key regulatory bodies listed here, they enforce distinct standards, and understanding these divergences is crucial for ensuring compliance, reducing time to market, and maintaining the global competitiveness for the medical devices. Regulatory divergence can also significantly affect the market access, product launch timelines, clinical testings, and other business strategies. Now, what I have observed in the recent past is that when major regulatory bodies enforce different standards and approval processes, the manufacturers have to navigate complex and often redundant compliance pathways. So, this not only increases the cost and delays time to market, but also can limit innovation and global reach, specifically for the small manufacturers. So, in the
Yeah,
next,
I agree.
right, thank you. So in the next slide, we will see what are the areas which are mostly affected by the divergence. So some of the major aspects which comes to mind, which is affected by the divergence is firstly is the clinical trial. So clinical trial is basically affected by the difference in the scope, the design, the execution, the approval of the regulatory bodies in different regions, such as different sample sizes, endpoints, reporting standards. Say for a different agencies like say FDA or EMA, it might lead to duplicated effort, higher costs, delays in global drug development, and at the end, patient access. I can quote a study where it was reported that 65% of the trials submitted to both FDA and EMA had different sample sizes, and nearly 70% of them reported different efficacy outcomes also. So these kind of inconsistencies can hinder the global trial harmonization, affect the data comparability, and ultimately delay the patient access to the innovative therapies. The next thing which comes to mind is the documentation standards. So regulatory divergence in documentation standard complicates the global submissions by requiring different formats and contents across jurisdictions. For instance, while the FDA emphasizes a detailed clinical study reports, the EU-MDR might focus more on the risk management part and post-marketing surveillance. So these discrepancies force the companies to create multiple versions of technical files, labeling, and clinical evidence, increasing administrative workload and the risk of non-compliance. So harmonizing these documentation still remains a major challenge in the global product development and the regulatory approval. The third thing where we come to the business part is the market access. So the regulatory divergence creates major barrier to market access by requiring region-specific strategies, leading to duplicated efforts, again, higher cost, delayed product launches, and especially it is difficult for the smaller firms who aim to enter multiple markets. For example, if a medical device is approved in US under FDA, it may require substantial modifications to meet EU MDR or TGA requirements. So these inconsistencies can limit a product's global reach and discourage the smaller firms from entering multiple markets. So Anushi, how do you think these all factors affect the overall compliance?
Yeah, before we get there, actually, Ipshita, I would like to bring in another aspect, which is increased risk of non-compliance. So the
Right,
regulatory divergence increases the risk of non-compliance as the manufacturers must navigate the inconsistent rules and the evolving standards across the various regions. A process that is acceptable to one authority, for instance, the FDA, may not be exactly similar to EU MDR or TGA requirements. Thus, there can be possibly errors, delays, or penalties. And moreover, I think frequent updates to the regional regulations that we just talked about make it all the more challenging to maintain up-to-date compliance across all the markets. So
right,
I think what we can keep in mind is staying compliant demands strong regulatory intelligence and agile strategies.
right, right.
With that said, we are now here with the first poll of this session. Kelly, could you please launch the poll? Right. So the question for the poll today is, what do you find most challenging when drafting EU MDR documentation? And the options are interpreting complex regulatory requirements. Second option is compiling robust clinical evidence, maintaining consistency across documents, or adapting to frequent updates and guidance. Ipshita, according to you, what has been the most challenging factor when it comes to this aspect?
Right. So, what I see recently in my experience is compiling the robust clinical evidence has become a major challenge for the manufacturers because it is due to the elevated threshold of clinical quality or requiring device specific data or, say, up to date evidence, which might not be present at that time with the manufacturer and needs to be derived from, say, new clinical investigation. And in addition to that, the variability in notified body expectations or, say, limited regulatory guidance and a widespread knowledge gap in the clinical evaluation methodologies between the manufacturers and those who are writing the CRs further complicate the generation of compliant clinical evaluation reports. So, providing a proper or robust clinical evidence in a
Mhm.
CER is one of the major challenge which I see the manufacturers are facing, and most of the NB comments come on that.
Right. I think we will be close enough. I feel maybe perhaps between, the options, what you rightly said, the clinical evidence and even consistency across documents, could be an option. So can we see the results, please? Right. Oh, wow. That's a very evened out, poll results that we have, which we
Right.
normally don't see. But again, that just shows from the audience that, there are multiple challenges across the four main points that we've just picked on. Any thoughts on this, Akshita? I think,
Yeah.
of course, it's down to case-to-case basis in terms of, the choice that the people are registering for in terms of the results.
Right. So the highest comes to the adapting to frequent updates in the guidance.
Mhm.
So I think that adapting to the frequent regulatory updates is a primary concern, and that basically resonates with many teams in today's environment. Guidance documents, especially from the MDCG, are released regularly and often bringing new interpretations. So I think even post certifications, the documents may need updating to reflect revised expectations. This makes proactive regulatory monitoring and flexible documentation systems key to staying compliant. And I think it also reinforces the value of a cross-functional team that can
Correct.
quickly evaluate the implement the regulatory changes across technical files. Over to you,
And
Anushree. Yeah,
one of the other options also, which we saw high results for, is like we already talked about maintaining consistency, which I want to bring up the point that we will be covering this aspect in the subsequent slides when we
right.
talk more about leveraging technology. I think that would be a better discussion. So moving forward then, before we dive into the strategies and the solutions, it's important to firstly understand the key pain points, the manufacturers are facing when it comes to EU MDR documentation. So firstly, the complexity of requirements. As we know that the MDR has introduced significantly more detailed expectations when compared to the MDD. Like, for instance, the expanded scope, the emphasis on having robust clinical evidence, and also the interlinking documentation make it very challenging to maintain clarity and also compliance across the entire technical file. And
Agreed.
as Shita also said previously, the continuous regulatory updates as well can lead to inconsistency and can also be challenging. The next point here is efficient maintenance. So we know that keeping a documentation updated is not a one-time task when we are talking about medical devices. It's an ongoing process with the pace of regulatory updates coming up, the changes in the guidances, and also the evolving interpretations of the notified bodies. And this can also be time consuming and can also incur high costs to the manufacturers. The next main pain, the next main pain point would be risk management. So we know according to the EU MDR, the risk is integrated throughout the technical documentation of a medical device, starting all the way from the design to clinical evaluation to post-market surveillance. And ensuring alignment across all these areas requires strong cross-functional coordination. And finally, data management. So, structuring, organizing, managing your data, and also ensuring data integrity is intact is again a major challenge posed by the manufacturers, particularly when it comes to audits or notified bodies. So, each of these pain points can actually introduce inefficiency, increase the risk of non compliance, and ultimately delay market access if not addressed proactively.
I agree with you, Anushree, here. Since the MDR has made the documentation pretty robust, these are basically the major hurdles which the manufacturers face. However, I would also like to say complying to MDR has also given a path to manufacturers to use documentation for other submissions also with minimal changes, right? So, what do you think the positive aspects of EU MDR documentation are?
Yeah, I'd like to cover that with our next slide, in fact. So when it comes to documentation under the EUMDR, key points that one should keep in mind is that the documentation should be comprehensive, should be adaptable, it should be robust with the evidence that you're presenting. At the end of the day, at the core of the MDR documentation is the technical documentation, which must clearly demonstrate compliance with all the applicable GSPRs. The documentation should evolve as the new data emerges, especially from the post-market activities. And this shift towards the continuous documentation requires the manufacturers to adopt more efficient systems, tighter cross-functional processes, and a proactive compliance mindset. So when it comes to drafting, for instance, the clinical evaluation documents, clearly define the intended purpose of the device, the indications and design features in your documentation. Demonstrate a systematic life cycle based approach as per ISO 14971 with basically the benefit risk consistently. It's supported by the clinical evidence. And also make sure that the data from manufacturer as applicable is also included in your CARs. Additionally, provide robust, up-to-date clinical evidence showing conformity with GSPRs. And lastly, show continuous monitoring of safety and performance in real-world use. With that said, the EU MDR documentation can also be adapted for global submissions, including the FDA, the Health Canada, or TGA, thereby enabling efficiency and consistency across these markets. And additionally, we can also leverage information from the risk management files that are developed under the EU MDR to meet the similar safety and risk requirements in other jurisdictions. And the last point I want to highlight here is that using the harmonized standards such as ISO 14971 or ISO 13485 can help you streamline submissions to regulatory bodies that firstly recognize them, supporting faster and more consistent global approvals.
Right, Anusha. That's absolutely correct. And the EU MDR sets a high standard for technical documentation, requiring comprehensive, structured, and transparent records across device life cycle. So this includes a detailed clinical evaluation, risk management file, post-marketing surveillance plan, and conformity assessments also. So, because of the depth and rigor, these documents often align well with the expectation of other major regulatory bodies, such as FDA, TGA, and Health Canada, like you said. And adopting these standards as a baseline, the manufacturers can streamline the global submission by reducing the duplication of effort, ensuring consistency across markets. And this approach will not only enhance the regulatory efficiency, but also support a faster, more coordinated international market access, especially with the clinical documentation we submit to the notified bodies.
Yeah, that's correct. So I want to next bring up the fact that the most time-consuming and complex clinical documents that need to be drafted in compliance to EU MDR are your CPCR, PMS and PMCF documentation, the SSCP, and also the risk management documentation. And in order to make our lives easier, to make the process more efficient, what we would like to cover and talk about next is how can we leverage technology when it comes to drafting these clinical documents.
Rightly said, Anushree. AI can indeed help us a lot. So here in Celegence, we use our proprietary AI-assisted software called Captus, and this serves as a single workspace for teams to carry out their end-to-end processes for these documentations. So basically, from running their literature search, extracting the data from included articles, along with the entire workflow which we require for the review and maintenance of these documents.
True.
Captus basically leverages the AI assistance to simplify the data handling, offers customizable tagging and report table creation, and enables a seamless integration with the databases like PubMed and Google Scholar. Additionally, another benefit, it also provides a powerful audit log for decision tracking, real-time updates from AE databases like MOD and TPLC, and the tools for generating comprehensive author reports. So by automating these kind of repetitive tasks and centralizing data access, Captus significantly reduces the manual workload, saving hours of effort and accelerating the project timelines. So whether you are in a regulatory affairs or you are in a medical writing profession, Captus is designed to elevate the workflow and efficiency for you. Now, the best part of this is all of that happens in one centralized system, which makes it really easy and efficient to create, track, and maintain our regulatory submission. I wanted to ask you, Nishi, what do you think about integrating the AI with clinical documentation process?
Yeah, actually, that's been an interesting topic, introduction to AI across various fields, including medical device industry. I think it gives us a good head start in terms of, starting something maybe not from scratch, and you can leverage the knowledge that, AI has plugged in. And speaking of which, I would like to cover a few points with regards to the report writing module that Captus has. So when it comes to using technology, some of the features that can be utilized when using Captus to draft your clinical documentation is the fact that we can easily bookmark data and also create content links from the technical documentation that you upload to a project for a specific medical device. And that data set can then be leveraged to write your clinical documentation that you're using Captus for.
Right. It's actually a really very powerful platform designed to streamline the research, literature reviews, and regulatory reporting. So, Capus often offers AI driven tools for efficient data handling, customizable tagging, and like I said, seamless integration with databases like PubMed and Google Scholar. The literature module allows users to plug automatically updating tables directly into the reports, eliminating the need for manual updates. And additionally, Captus also helps to create the referencing libraries from the included articles and enables the user to insert the citation using its built in reference manager. So, this not only saves time but also removes the need for a separate reference management software. So finally, what I can say is Captus empowers the team to work faster, stay compliant, and focus on really high value tasks. However, we do have other challenges also for EU MDR compliance, which might not be directly related with writing, but it impacts the documentation part. So I was thinking how AI can help with those also. So, what I wanted to say is because we see in a conventional management, the process centered around people, with the assumption that people are going to follow the SOPs to every single word. And the downsides are the issues with scalability, revisiting documents after NB feedback, and of course, maintenance. A question to think about is how many times we have to scavenge through the old folders looking for data like a digital archaeologist. And when all those things fail, we again go back to the person who created the report, praying that they are still in the organization, which might lead to further knowledge gaps if they are not in the organization, making it really hard to scale up and expand. So I think here comes the AI handy, and it really helps to address the key regulatory challenges by enhancing the consistency, accuracy, and efficiency in compliance processes. It reduces the lack of consistency by standardizing interpretations of global regulation, automating documentation workflows, or minimizing the error prone nature of manual submissions. Also, it lessens the dependency on individual expertise by embedding the regulatory knowledge into intelligence systems, and that leads to a scalable solution across regions. One thing, more thing is it proactively monitors the regulatory challenges to mitigate the compliance risk, which automation finally can cut cost and time by streamlining repetitive tasks. Ultimately, AI also boosts agility, allowing faster adaptation to evolving market and regulatory demands. Thus, it just helps us to reduce our manual efforts, the time, the cost, other than the challenges which we really face while writing a CER or a big technical documentation in the under EU MDR. That being said, I think it's the time for the second poll here. Kelly, can you please launch the poll? The poll question here is: what is your primary challenge in responding to notified body observations? Understanding the observations, communication and feedback, documentation updates, and meeting timelines. Anusha, what do you think is the most challenging part in responding to NB observations?
I think I would go with two options here, starting with understanding the observations first. I feel like the audience might vote for this. Um,
Okay.
Sorry, I was just checking. Are you seeing the correct poll on the screen?
No, it's the, I think the poll
Okay,
question is a
it'll
slightly
come
different
up
poll.
again.
Okay,
Okay, while the poll comes in, yeah, I was saying, I believe the understanding the observation sometimes can be challenging in terms of, what the reviewer has written as a question. That could be
right.
definitely a challenge. And the other very important aspect, and which I think is a bigger challenge, is meeting the timelines when it comes to submissions to the notified bodies. I believe, especially when it comes to, further rounds after the first round, then it can be a challenging from the manufacturer's perspective. What are your thoughts, Ipshita?
Right. Other than this, I think communication and feedback is also one of the challenge because effective communication and feedback management, which are critical and challenging aspects, because it provides a detailed and iterative feedback that requires timely and precise responses. And the time to respond to notified bodies are generally pretty stringent. So when
Correct.
multiple teams come together to create a response, that might get involved the miscommunication or delays in comments, and basically can lead to prolonged review cycles or even non-conformities, I think. Another
Yeah,
major thing is documentation updates. I think
correct.
so, because most frequent areas of feedback from NB is lack of timely and traceable documentation.
Mm-hmm.
And I
There we
think
have
the,
it now.
yes, we have the right poll right now. And I think the other point is the documentation that reflects the latest clinical data. For example, a risk assessment or a PMS should be included while writing the CER. Otherwise, I think that comes back as a feedback that there is
Correct.
inconsistency across the major documentation. What do you
Correct.
think about it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think I have a feeling again, these are four important points that we have seen, from the manufacturers that we have worked with. So
right.
could be a close call again, who knows? So let's wait and see.
Yeah.
Yeah. But definitely, like we have seen, given across the different, whether it's your different classification of devices or different scenarios where there might be lack of clinical data or too much data, can lead to some of these challenges.
Yeah, that's true. And the point is, if the data is not clear, there is an unstructured narrative that can lead to
Correct.
inconsistencies, wrong interpretation, or gaps in documentation that frequently trigger the NB feedback in the second round or
Correct.
the third round. And
Correct.
addressing these challenges requires intelligent tools and structured methodology that can basically extract the correct data, tag it,
Good
and
strategy, of
context.
course.
Yes, and contextualize the observations to meet the expectations, or basically the questions which NB has asked in terms of the gaps in data. So
Mm-hmm.
I think here we can use the AI also, like we were discussing before, that
Yeah.
to get a precise data and remove the manual error. Uh, that can really help us to make the document more accurate. And I think generate data which is
Mhm.
required in the CER, rather than just putting some kind of data which is giving a subjective interpretation in terms of clinical data.
Yeah, I agree. Can we see the results, please?
Yeah.
Right. So we have understanding observation as the most challenging with 45%, followed by documentation updates and then communication and timelines. It's interesting how timelines didn't get, major chunk of the vote, but understanding observations, like we already discussed, understandably so. So with
Yeah.
that said, we'd like to move on to the next topic for the day. So we just covered the poll and we saw what the audience is, seeking when it comes to notified body observations and in turn expectations. So we wanted to cover some expectations that you can follow as a proactive approach for your clinical documentation for EU-MDR as well as other regulatory standards. So starting with, you need to make sure that there is alignment across all documentation, whether it's your CR, the risk documentation, the labeling documents, or the PMS, PMCF documentation. So when we talk about the next point here, starting with device description, we need to consider that we have the details of the subject device along with any devices which it can be used in conjunction with, if applicable. Make sure you have the information also included for any variants or generations of the device. Ensure that the manufacturer data, the clinical and PMS data, as well as clinical risks are clearly mentioned in the CERs. The next very important topic, and I think more talked about in the industry, is the point about clinical benefits. So I would just like to highlight some pointers here with that regard. So according to the EU MDR, the clinical benefits must be clearly defined, evidence-based, and aligned with the device's intended purpose. And these benefits can be either direct or indirect benefit. And for example, we take an example for a device with a direct benefit. This could be a hip replacement implant, which basically has the benefit of measurable improvement in mobility, the reduction of pain, and thereby improvement in quality of life for the patients. And the example for a device with indirect benefit could be an ECG monitoring device, which basically does not directly treat the medical condition, but the indirect benefit that it provides is the fact that it enables timely diagnosis, it supports more effective treatment planning, and in turn improves the patient outcome. And talking about clinical risks, you should keep in mind that these should be clearly identified based on the data coming in from the risk management files, the clinical investigations, if performed for a device, your PMS data, and also published literature. So then these should be evaluated with regard to the clinical benefits of the device to basically establish the benefit risk profile that should be presented in the CAR.
Yeah, right, Anushree. I agree with you on what you said. So, in addition to that, the benefit risk profile of the device should be evaluated through a comprehensive review of clinical data, scientific literature, and through post marketing surveillance report. Because the clinical evidence demonstrates that the device achieves its intended therapeutic outcomes with a favorable safety profile, and the identified risks as outlined in the risk management file have been mitigated through design controls and considered acceptable when weighed against the documented clinical benefit. The literature sources, which we generally include in the CER, further support the device's efficacy and safety in comparable patient population and reinforcing the conclusion that overall the benefit weighs the residual risk for the device. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I would also like to cover, some other expectations that, the notified bodies have is with regards to the safety and performance endpoints. So the identification of specific measurable safety and performance endpoints associated with the clinical benefits that you define is very important. And these endpoints basically serve as objective benchmarks to demonstrate that the device performs as intended and does so safely in the intended patient population. For example, the performance endpoints for a device may include accuracy, device longevity, while safety endpoints may address complication rates or adverse event frequency. In addition, a well-defined acceptance criteria should also be determined for these safety and performance endpoints.
Yes, that's right. Acceptance criteria is one of the most important part in the CER, and this can be generally defined through the literature, the publications we include. Now, having said that, developing a methodologically sound literature search protocol is very important under EUMTR for the documentations we make, Because under UMDR, a robust and transparent literature search protocol is essential for demonstrating the clinical evaluation of medical devices, and notified body expects a clearly defined methodology that includes well structured inclusion and exclusion criteria, or a critical appraisal strategy, and a reproducible search process. So importantly, the protocol must distinctly separate the literature search for DUE, that is our subject device or device under evaluation, from that of the state of the art, because the segregation ensures the clarity in how current device performs and is assessed relative to the existing alternatives or standards. So, a methodologically sound approach not only strengthens the scientific validity of the clinical evaluation report, but also enhances the regulatory confidence and audit readiness. Another major point which we do in the CER is we use the equivalence pathway. So, when using the equivalence pathway, the manufacturers must provide a comprehensive and well documented justification in the CER for clinical, technical, and biological comparability as outlined in our MDCG 2025. So, manufacturers must show that the devices share similar design, materials, mode of action, and intended use, and that they have sufficient access to the technical documentation of the equivalent device also if required. So, notified body generally scrutinize these claims, especially for class 3 and implantable devices, and expect a clear, traceable evidence supporting each aspect of equivalence. And failure to meet these expectations can result in delays or, say, even in the rejection of the clinical evaluation. So the CER must include appropriate verification and validation testings to demonstrate that the medical device consistently meets the safety and performance requirements. And these tests also provide objective evidence that the device functions as intended under defined conditions by the manufacturers, and also supports the clinical claims which are made in the CER, right?
Yeah, I agree. So literature definitely is another key section that you have in your clinical documents. If you
Yeah.
apply these proactive strategies, I think it will benefit you all. Speaking of which, I would next like to talk about points with regards to PMS and PMCF data. So, as part of the clinical evaluation process, the PMS data must be regularly assessed to identify any new or emerging risks. And this includes evaluating the adverse event reports, the user feedback, the complaints, and literature. Where applicable, you should also perform trend analysis to detect statistically significant increases in the frequency or severity of known issues. And any new risk or trends identified must then be documented and evaluated in the CER. They should also be assessed for any impact on the current benefit risk profile of the medical device. And they should also be used to inform risk management, labeling, or design changes if necessary. And coming to PMCF, post-market clinical follow-up, it is a proactive process that is designed to continuously gather clinical data on the safety and performance of a device once it is on the market. A well-documented PMCF plan and its execution are essential components of the clinical evidence framework. The CR must clearly demonstrate how PMCF activities align with and support the conclusions of the CR. What are the specific clinical questions or residual risks that the PMCF is addressing? And what data collection methods are being used? For instance, these could be either registries, surveys, or observational studies. In addition, a clear justification for the scope and design of PMCF activities must be included in the CR. Why certain PMCF methods were chosen, how they are appropriate for the device type and risk classification, and what are the expected outcomes when it comes to the benefit risk profile. The CR must clearly demonstrate also that the conformity to the GSPRs outlined in Annex 1 of the EU MDR by identifying the applicable GSPRs based on the device's intended purpose and risk classification. This ensures that the technical documentation package is robust and audit ready.
Right. Rightly said, Anushri. So, what we see in the general trend today is if the CER is having any gap in the clinical evidence, the pathway
Yeah,
to collect data for that is basically the PMCF. So, like you said, how the PMCF activity is done, what were the methods that were chosen, and how are they appropriate for the device type and risk class, that must be very clearly mentioned in the PMCF plan. And
yeah,
another important point, which I feel, is the what is the frequency of that PMCF activity. That
yeah.
also needs to be aligned with the risk class of the device or the gap in the evidence that you have in the CER. So I think what you said is completely correct, that the PMCF methods need to be aligned with the CER, and they need to be done in case we do have a gap in the clinical evidence.
Yeah, exactly. With that said, we'd like to move forward to the next point of discussion, which is with regards to how can you achieve enhanced clinical evaluation with regards to EU-MDR or even adapting that to other regulatory standards. So starting with, I would like to add in achieving the success under the EU-MDR in today's broader regulatory landscape. The manufacturers must approach compliance as a strategic imperative. What this requires is a coordinated and forward thinking approach built on the key factors presented on the left hand side of the slide. Starting with the first point, comprehensive planning. So, the compliance starts with a clear end to end roadmap that anticipates regulatory demands and aligns with business objectives. The next point to keep in mind is cross functional team collaboration. Effective execution depends on strong coordination between your clinical, regulatory, quality, and technical teams. We often see that if there's any misalignment between these teams, that may lead to inefficiencies in the process. The next point to consider is systematic documentation. The documentation must be structured, traceable, audit ready, clearly demonstrating compliance throughout the device lifecycle. And we did cover the importance of technology integration. So just to highlight again, as part of strategic move that one can use is the fact that leveraging digital tools and platforms like Captus can help you to enable better data management, version control, process automation, all of which are critical for efficiency and scalability. And lastly, continuous monitoring. Compliance does not end at submission. So, ongoing vigilance through post market surveillance, regulatory intelligence, and internal audits can ensure sustained alignment and sustained compliance.
Right. But another major strategy, which is generally considered a bit difficult to achieve, is the audit readiness, like you can see on the slide. But it is a fundamental aspect for maintaining compliance within the medical device life cycle. So, how can we ensure that we are audit ready? The first and foremost thing that the manufacturers must adopt is a proactive approach and a structured way to get ready for the audits. So, the first thing that comes to mind is pre submission consultation. It is essential. Basically, what is engaging with the regulatory consultants or notified body early in the process to help identify the gaps in the documentation and compliance strategy before formal submission. This ensures that the technical documentation which the manufacturers have align with the MDR expectation and reduce the risk of delays and rejection. Another thing is documentation preparedness. So, this involves maintaining a complete, organized, and up to date set of records, including technical files, clinical evaluation reports, risk management files, and post marketing surveillance plan. These documents must be readily accessible and formatted in such a way that facilitates efficient review by the auditors. The third point is process and team awareness. This is a critical pillar for being audit ready. Why? Because all relevant personnel who are from the regulatory affairs or quality assurance or from clinical side, they must be trained on MDR requirements and understand their roles in maintaining the compliance. This might include, say, being familiar with the internal procedure or audit protocols or the ability to respond confidently to auditors' inquiries. The fourth point which comes to mind is evidence of compliance. So this must be demonstrable through traceable records that align with the GSPR in the Annex 1 of MDR. This includes clinical data, conformity assessments, and documented risk benefit analysis, which we generally do in the CER. Another point is communication and logistics. This should be planned beforehand to ensure that the audit proceeds smoothly. And this includes the scheduling, ensuring the availability of the key personnel who is responsible for the audit, and preparing the facilities or systems as required for inspection. So, a clear internal communication challenge and audit response protocol are vital for managing the real time auditor interactions. Finally, the last one, mock audits. It really serves as a valuable rehearsal tool. So, conducting an internal or third party mock audits help identify the weaknesses in the documentation or team readiness or any kind of procedural compliance which is there. And these simulations allow organization to correct the deficiencies beforehand and build confidence also ahead of formal regulatory inspections.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what we have to keep in mind is that audit readiness is a critical component of regulatory compliance in the medical device industry. And ensuring that the manufacturers are consistently prepared for both scheduled or even unannounced inspections by the regulatory authorities. And by fostering a culture of quality and preparedness, the manufacturers can not only meet regulatory expectations, but can also enhance operational efficiency and patient safety.
Right, that's true. See, we live in a world of rapidly evolving regulatory environment for medical devices, and staying ahead is not just a best practice, it's a necessity. So,
Yep.
the regulatory landscape, especially in the medical device and digital health sectors, are highly dynamic with frequent update to the standards, guidance document, and real-time updates to compliance expectations. So, delay adoption of these changes can have serious consequences, including, say, non compliance, market access barriers, or even product withdrawal. That's why future readiness is critical. And it is not only about meeting current requirements, but also anticipating what's next. So,
Yeah.
being proactive ensures that the patient safety is continued. The manufacturers have a sustained market presence and a strong competitive edge also. So, the manufacturers that embed regulatory foresight into their strategy are generally better positioned to innovate confidently or say respond swiftly to the changes and maintain trust with the regulators as well as the end users also.
Right, rightly said. And I would also like to point out on the slide here on the right-hand side, we do have some data sources which I believe one should be informed about and also keep a check with respect to any changes coming in with the guidance documents or even any regulatory standard documentation.
Right.
With that, we are now on towards the last bit of the webinar, which is the key takeaways. So we would like for you to focus on some of these aspects again, just to summarize what we talked about in our webinar today, starting with the point about creating harmonized and comprehensive EU MDR documentation. It is not just about ticking regulatory boxes, it's about building a foundation for global compliance and operational excellence. A well-structured MDR documentation set can serve as a strategic asset for you, enabling that the manufacturers leverage the same core content for other regulatory submissions with only minimal adjustments. And this approach can significantly enhance your operational efficiency, reduce duplication of effort, and lower the overall compliance cost. That said, you can also leverage technology that we spoke about. Tools like Captis can be instrumental in this process. And Captis can help you basically streamline the creation of the clinical documents through a highly optimized and intelligent documentation process, ensuring both cost and time efficiency. And if we bring in AI, integrate automation, and also have structured content management, we can also empower our teams to stay compliant, to stay audit ready, and future proof while freeing up the valuable resources for innovation and growth.
Right. In addition to that, what I would like to say is a well-defined clinical strategy is also essential for meeting the EU MDR requirements, right? Because it
Yeah.
ensures that the clinical evidence is purposeful, it's aligned with the device's intended use, and it just supports both safety and performance claim which the manufacturer is making in the CER. Additionally, like I just covered, the audit-ready documentation, it is very critical to ensure a smooth and efficient notified body audit because a well organized and up to date documentation not only supports the successful audits but also reinforces ongoing regulatory alignment, reducing the risk of findings, delays, or non conformities. The last but not least is regulatory landscapes are constantly evolving and staying compliant means staying ahead. So by monitoring the regulatory updates which are generally upcoming and integrating those changes early, you can reduce the compliance risk and we generally can position ourselves for a long-term success in the market. So, as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a quote that truly resonates with the spirit of our discussion. So, compliance is a journey, and the robust clinical evaluation is your compass. This quote beautifully captures the idea that navigating regulatory landscapes require direction, and clinical evaluation provides that essential guidance. So, as we navigate the evolving regulatory landscape, a strong clinical evaluation strategy ensures that we stay on course, grounded in the evidence, patient safety, and the innovation. With
Thank you.
this, yeah, thank you, Anusha.
All right. With that, we'll go Dr. Pshita, Dr. Anushree, terrific job. Thank you for sharing your expertise there. We've got a few minutes for questions, and if anyone's interested in doing a deeper dive around AI for regulatory writing, we do have a webinar coming up next week with RAPS, and you can scan that QR code for more information. I've got a couple questions in the chat, and I'll ask Dr. Anushree and Dr. Pshita to answer those. For those in the audience, if you have additional questions, put them in the Q&A, and we'll get to as many as we can. So first one is, does AI have the ability to analyze the evidence? We have to revise our documents annually, and there's a lot of data because our portfolio is high risk. Can AI help us?
Yes, sure, AI can help us for regulating documentations, even with those which have a high risk, because the documentation, as much as it goes in the high risk portfolio, the number of documents, as well as the number of evidence, as well as the complexity of the evidence increases highly. So, in that case, AI can help you getting the correct data out of those documents. For example, if you have a literature for, say, a class 3 device, you will have multiple literatures. So in that case, it's a very huge manual effort that you go through every publication, get out every data, every single value, and then you go ahead and form a acceptance criteria. So AI can directly help you to get that data from it, like our Captus does, and that will really help you to reduce the manual effort and in turn increase the accuracy also. Additional part is when you are doing through AI, the chances of a structured document is very high. For example, the name of the device or the class of the device or the rule to which it follows for its risk class, that can be maintained thoroughly in the CER, and the chances of getting it wrong at some places, because class 3 files are a higher complexity files, would be less. I think that answers the question.
Thank you, Dr. Pshita. I think that answered very well. And I'll just add that when we use technology, we always do human in the loop. So AI is a really good, think of it as like a first cut, a tool to help you, but it's
Right.
always the experienced writer that's in there making the final call. Dr. Anushree, I'm going to have you take this next one. How much
Sure.
time does it take to write a CER on your AI assisted platform?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Of course, there are some key aspects to consider when we generalize a clinical evaluation report. You have to keep in mind that there would be different scenarios. For instance, if it's a class 1 device with, of course, lesser amount of data versus perhaps a class 3, even implantable data set, which might have, too much data that, one needs to sieve through to then present it in your CR. But overall, again, what Ipshita just mentioned and Aaron also just mentioned, and it was also part of a discussion, compared to the fact that writing a CR without AI versus AI, you definitely save some amount of time, but of course, it is subjective according to the various aspects that I mentioned.
Yeah, and I think internally we've seen at least 30% time savings typically, and a lot of that comes in the literature review because there's,
Right,
as Dr.
Right.
Pshita said,
Yeah.
so much data there.
right. That's true.
All right, one more question, and then I think we need to wrap up. How long does it take for this technology platform to be implemented as part of the process? The MDR documents prepared in our company are prepared by doctors, scientists who are not very tech savvy and are comfortable with their current methods. I think a lot of us have worked with experts like that.
I think Ipshita and I both can talk from our experience. So it's just very basic when it comes to adopting or sieving through any new technology. So for instance, I believe we take not just the medical device industry and using platforms, even for example, the smallest changes with respect to having older set of mobile phones versus the smartphones. So I think it's a mindset that one needs to change. But when it comes to having the process in place, once you see how Captis can benefit you in terms of the features it has the automation, the AI feature. It can be easily adaptable with, of course, trainings provided to you. We do have help desk in hand. We do have Q&As and a guide also to help you out and see through the process. So it's definitely helpful. I would encourage people to try using, tools like Captus.
All right, and
Right.
with that, I think we're at the end of our time. So thank you very much. And thank you to our audience for the great questions and interaction.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.